In December 1948, a body was found on Somerton Beach in Adelaide, Australia. The body was a man who was dressed impeccably in a suit with polished shoes, and his head was slumped against a wall. Authorities thought the cause of death was heart failure or, more likely, poisoning. However, during the autopsy, no trace of poison was found. There wasn't a wallet or any type of identification on the man, and all the tags in his clothing were cut out. The fingerprints that the authorities took on him were also unidentifiable. They even put a photo of the body in the newspapers, and still, no one could identify who the man was. 4 months later, after the body was found, detectives found a hidden pocketbook that was sewn on the inside of the trousers. Inside the pocketbook was a rolled-up piece of paper from a very rare book called the Rabayat, a piece of paper that had the words Tamam Shud, which means, "It has ended." After months of looking for the exact book, authorities decided to bury the Somerton man without identification, although a cast was taken of the bust and he was embalmed to preserve him. 8 months later, a man walked into the police station. He claimed that just after the body was found, he found a copy of the Rawayat in the back of his car that was kept parked near the Somerton beach. He thought nothing of it until he read about the search in the newspaper article. Sure enough, the book had a part of the final page that was torn, and it matched the piece of paper that was found in the Somerton man's trousers. Inside the book were a phone number and some sort of strange code. The phone number led the authorities to a woman named Jessica Thompson who lived nearby. During her interview, she was very evasive and even claimed that she was going to faint when she saw the bust of the Somerton man, but denied knowing him. However, she did say that she did sell a book to a man named Alfred Boxall. Unfortunately, Alfred Boxall was still very much alive at the time and still had the copy of the Ramayat that Jessica had sold him. The code that was found ended up being even more unhelpful as of today. It has still yet to be cracked. To this day, the man on the Somerton beach has yet to be identified. In June 2014, Mariah and Derek Brodus and their 3 young children were getting ready to move into their new home, 657 Boulevard in Westfield, New Jersey. They claimed the 6-bedroom house was their dream home and located just a couple of blocks away from Mariah's childhood home in one of the top 30 safest cities in the United States. 3 days after closing the sale, before the Brodus family had even begun to move in, a letter arrived in their new mailbox. The letter was addressed to the new owner in big, clunky handwriting. The typed letter read as follows: "Dearest new neighbor of 657 Boulevard, allow me to welcome you to the neighborhood. How did you end up here? Did 657 Boulevard call to you with its force within? 657 Boulevard has been the subject of my family for decades now, and as it approaches its 110th birthday, I have been put in charge of watching and waiting for its second coming. My grandfather watched the house in the 1920s, and his father watched it in the 1960s. It is now my turn. Who am I? There are hundreds and hundreds of cars that drive by 657 Boulevard each day. Maybe I'm one of them. Look at all the windows you can see from 657 Boulevard. Maybe I'm in one. Look at any of the many windows in 657 Boulevard at all the people who stroll by each day. Maybe I am one." The letter also mentions specifics about the Brodus family. "You have children. I have seen them," the letter continued. "So far, I think that there are 3 that I have counted. Do you need to fill the house with the young blood I requested? Better for me. Was your old house too small for the growing family? Or was it greed to bring me your children? Once I know their names, I will call them and draw them to me." At the bottom of the letter, the author used the cursive font to sign, "The Watcher." After receiving the letter, the Brodus family reached out to the previous family who had sold them the house, John and Andrea Woods. They stated that during the 23 years of living at 657 Boulevard, they had never received a letter like that except once a few days before they were getting ready to move out of the house. The Woods family also stated that they had never felt watched in the 2 decades they had lived at the house and, in fact, rarely felt the need to lock the door at night. While they thought that the note that they had received was odd, they threw the note away without much concern. Still, the 2 families went to the police with the letter, and an investigation was opened. The police warned the families not to tell anyone about the letters, including their neighbors who were now all suspects. 2 weeks later, even though the Broaddus family still hadn't moved in, they received a second letter with even more chilling specifics about the family, including the children's birth order and nicknames. The watcher also asked, "Will the children sleep in the attic? Or will all of you sleep on the 2nd floor? Who has the bedrooms facing the street? I will know as soon as you move in. It will help me to know who is in which bedroom. Then I can plan better." Several weeks later, the Broaddus family had put their plans on hold to move in, a third letter arriving saying, "Where have you gone to? 657 Boulevard is missing you." By the end of 2014, the case had stalled. There was no digital trail, and the mental effects were taking a toll on the Broaddus family. There were no fingerprints and no way to place somebody at the scene of the crime. Only 6 months after they received the letters, they decided to sell the home. 657 Boulevard has been sold, and it's currently off the market while the watcher's identity still remains a mystery. On April 12, 1981, in Keddie, California, the Sharp family and some friends went to sleep inside cabin 28 at the Keddie Resort Lodge. Sheila Sharp would wake to find her mother, Sue, her brother Johnny, and their family friend, Dana Wingate, brutally murdered inside the cabin while her 12-year-old sister, Tina, was missing from the scene. Sheila only escaped the murders by sleeping at a friend's cabin next door. Surprisingly, they found Sheila's 2 younger brothers, Greg and Rick, and their friend Justin Smart, asleep in another bedroom inside cabin 28 and safe. Tina's remains would be found by an anonymous tip on the 3rd anniversary of the murders. Her skull was found 50 miles away from Keddie in a different county. There were only 2 suspects that the police examined, Marty Smart and his roommate, Bo Bidet. Marty Smart was married to Marilyn Smart, and they were parents to Justin Smart. Marty was apparently an abusive husband. Since Sheila Sharp had just escaped an abusive relationship herself, there were reports that she was giving Marilyn some counseling. When Marty found out that Sheila was interfering in his marriage, he reportedly went ballistic. Soon after the murders, Marty left Keddie for Reno, Nevada. Law enforcement felt that the murders took more than one person to conduct, which is why they took Bo Bidet in questioning as an accomplice. Bo Bidet was also an ex-con. Despite there being so much more to the case, the investigation oddly stopped there. There was evidence that seemingly went unnoticed, and people of interest there were not examined properly. The murderer of the Keddie crimes has not been identified, and the case remains unsolved. On January 22, 1935, a man calling himself Roland T. Owen checked into the Hotel President in Kansas City, Missouri. He showed up with no luggage. He was described as being 20 to 35 years old, had brown hair, a scar on his scalp visible above the ear, and a case of cauliflower ear. He was nicely dressed in a black coat and received a room key for room 1046. When the maid, Mary Soptic, said Owen allowed her to clean while he was in the room but asked her not to lock the door behind her because his friend was about to visit the room very soon. Soptic said that he kept the blinds drawn tight and the lights off with an exception of one dim lamp. Other staff members who entered the room mentioned that same detail. Soptic also mentioned that Owen was either worried about something or afraid, and always wanted to kind of keep it in the dark. At 4 p.m., Soptic returned with fresh towels to find Owen lying on the bed, completely dressed in the dark, and the door unlocked. She also saw a note that read, "Dawn, I will be back in 15 minutes. Wait." The next morning, January 3rd, Soptic came back to clean the room. He noticed that the door had been locked from the outside and assumed Owen had locked it while he was leaving the room. However, Owen was sitting inside, again with the lights off, which meant that someone else had locked the door from outside the room. When Soptic was cleaning, Owen answered a telephone call and said, "No, Dawn, I don't want to eat. I'm not hungry. I just had breakfast." Repeating, "No, I'm not hungry." Soptic again arrived later that evening to bring fresh towels and heard two male voices coming from inside the room. When she knocked on the door, she heard a rough voice say, "Who is it?" When she explained that she had fresh towels, the voice replied, "We don't need any." During the night, a woman staying in room 1048 would report hearing loud voices, both male and female, cursing on the same floor. There was a party going on that night in room 1055. The next morning, January 4th, around 7 a.m., the hotel switch operator noticed that Owen's phone was off the hook for quite some time without being in use. So, she sent the bellboy, Randolph Probst, to go see what was up. Despite the door having a "Do Not Disturb" sign, Probst knocked several times and heard a voice that said, "Come in, turn on the lights." However, the door was locked and no one was getting up to let the bellboy in. So, after knocking repeatedly, Probst simply said, "Put the phone back on the hook," assuming that Owen was drunk. About an hour and a half later, and around 8:30 a.m., the phone was still off the hook. And another bellboy, Harold Pike, let himself into the room with a passkey. Using only the light from the hall, Pike discovered Owen lying on the bed naked and assumedly drunk. He also noticed that the bedding was darkened around Owen. The phone stand was kicked down to the ground, so he fixed it and put the phone back on the receiver. From 10:30 to 10:45 a.m., the phone once again was off the receiver. They sent Probst to resolve the situation, and when he opened the door, he saw a truly horrific scene. Probst told the police, "When I entered the room, the man was within 2 feet at the door, on his knees and elbows, holding his head in his hands. I saw blood on his head. I turned the lights on. I looked around and I saw blood on the walls, on the bed, and in the bathroom. This frightened me and I immediately left and went downstairs." Owen had been bound with a cord around his neck, wrists, and ankles. His neck had bruising, suggesting someone had attempted to strangle him. He had been stabbed more than once in the chest above the heart, and one of the wounds had punctured his lungs. Blows to his head had left him with a skull fracture on the right side. In addition to the blood Probst had seen, there was some additional spatter on the ceiling. Dr. Flanders cut the cord from Owen's wrist and asked him who had done this to him. "Nobody," he answered. When they asked who had caused these injuries, Owen said he had fallen and hit his head on the bathtub. The doctor asked if he had been trying to kill himself. After saying no, Owen lost consciousness and was taken to the hospital. He was completely comatose by the time he arrived and died shortly after midnight on January 5th. Although Owen's true identity was revealed a year and a half later as Artemis Ogletree, no suspects have been identified. The Kansas City police continue to investigate. On July 26, 1974, 12-year-old Leslie Metcalf was returning from the beach with her family in Provincetown, Massachusetts. A local dog had followed them, and when it took off barking, Leslie broke away from her parents and started to go after it. In the dunes of Race Pond Beach, a mile east of a ranger station, Leslie found the decomposing body of a naked woman. The woman was 5'6", weighing about 145 pounds, and was between 20 and 40 years old. She was lying on one side of a beach towel with her head resting on a pair of jeans and a blue bandana. It was estimated that the body had been laying there for about 10 days to 3 weeks before being discovered. The left side of her head was crushed and she had been almost completely decapitated. While no weapons were found, it was believed that a military entrenchment tool was used to almost cut off the head. Her hands, though, were removed to conceal the identity through fingerprints. Due to the horrific state of the body, authorities believe that the woman was murdered with no sign of struggle at the time. Authorities believe that the unidentified victim would have known her murderer. The only signs of evidence were the size 10 footprints that indicated a heavy person running away. Provincetown Police Chief Jimmy Meads said that the killer likely drove the victim to the dune in a four-wheel drive sand vehicle to sunbathe. Despite using bloodhounds, missing persons bulletins, scourging the registers of local lodgings, and looking into anyone who had a permit to bring their vehicle into the beach, police turned up nothing. In 2019, Provincetown local Margie Childs reflected on the case, saying, "The fact that no one could identify the Lady of the Dunes in the tight-knit community was very strange." Almost 50 years later, the victim known as the Lady of the Dunes is still unidentified. On July 2, 1951, in St. Petersburg, Florida, Mary Hardy Reeser was visited by her son, Dr. Richard Reeser, in her apartment. Mary had told her son that she had taken 2 mild sedatives that were used to calm patients before surgery. She also had told him that she was planning to take 2 more before bed. Later that night, she would fall asleep in an upholstered chair at the same time as she would become victim of an apparent house fire. The next morning, Mary's landlord would report smelling smoke around 5 a.m., but it wasn't until around 8 a.m. when she would go to deliver a telegraph to Mary that she would smell the smoke again. She discovered soot in the hallway, and the doorknob leading to Mary's apartment was too hot to grasp, so she enlisted in the help of nearby house painters to help get into the apartment. What they found inside the apartment was truly horrifying. They found the remains of Mary Reeser. Her skull apparently was shrunk to the size of a cup, and parts of her spine also remained. But the most terrifying was Mary's left foot was still found in its black satin slipper, the skin unburned. The rest of her remains had been completely cremated. What makes this case odd was the environment on her surroundings. In order for a body to be cremated, the body must burn at 3,000 degrees Fahrenheit for 3 to 4 hours. Yet, somehow, the surrounding area of her chair and the rest of her apartment was relatively unaffected. The walls had no burn marks and showed no signs of scorching or burned paint. Light switches were melted, but outlets were still completely functional. Candlesticks had melted, but their wicks still stood upright, and a stack of newspapers also to the chair was undamaged. Mary's neighbors were also unaware of the fire. The FBI eventually declared that Mary had been incinerated by the wick effect, when the clothing of the victim soaks up melted human fat and acts like the wick of a candle. As she was a known user of sleeping pills, they hypothesized that she had fallen unconscious while smoking and set fire to her nightclothes. However, there is still some speculation that she died of spontaneous human combustion. In the 1940s, Florence and John Pollock were married, and in 1946, having had 2 sons, they welcomed their first daughter, who was named Joanna. In 1951, Florence gave birth to another baby girl named Jacqueline. Despite their age differences, 2 girls had an extremely close bond. Joanna liked to take care of Jacqueline and saw herself as the ultimate big sister. Since their mother was busy running the family grocery delivery business, Joanna saw herself as a second mother to her little sister. They enjoyed playing dress-up and pretend, and generally enjoyed being around each other. Eerily, Joanna would always state that she would never grow up to become a lady. She would always say that she would remain a child forever. No one took her seriously and chalked it up to a child's creative imagination. On May 7, 1957, 6-year-old Jacqueline and 11-year-old Joanna were walking to church with a young neighborhood boy, as they often did. While they were walking, a car came up behind them and purposely hit them, going at an incredibly high speed, killing all 3 children. The Pollock sister died instantly, and the little boy they were with died from his injuries at the hospital. The woman who was driving the car had lost her children in a custody battle and was feeling angry and upset, and was actually trying to take her own life. When learning about her children's deaths, Florence fell into a deep depression that lasted quite a long time. John, on the other hand, had the spiritual belief that the girls were in heaven and that they had been reincarnated. He said that he would have dreams about the girls and also felt some sort of presence in their bedroom. He claimed that every time that they would go there, he felt like he wasn't alone. John also had a fascination with reincarnation and would pray to God to bring his daughters back. Florence, on the other hand, was a very strict Catholic and never toyed with any of John's notions about reincarnation. This put such a strain on their relationship that they almost got a divorce. However, they stayed together and got pregnant again. From the beginning of the pregnancy, John thought that there were 2 babies despite the doctor only claiming 1. However, John would keep insisting that there were 2 and the doctor was proved wrong on the day that the twins Jillian and Jennifer were born, on October 4th, 1958. Twins never ran in the family and Florence never felt like she had 2 fetuses growing inside her. Eerily, the newborn twins had the same exact birthmarks that Joanna and Jacqueline had, and it was this that Florence started to seriously consider her husband's beliefs. When the twins were old enough to talk, they began identifying and requesting toys that had belonged to their sisters who had passed on. They would also point out landmarks that only Joanna and Jacqueline would have known, like the school that they attended. Plus, they would sometimes panic upon seeing cars and knew about street safety without either of their parents telling them about it. The story of the Pollock sisters made its way to Dr. Ian Stevenson, a psychologist who studied reincarnation. After studying thousands of reincarnation cases, Dr. Stevenson wrote a book telling of 14 he believed to have been real, including that of the Pollock sisters. Whether or not the actual occurrence of reincarnation exists has yet to be explained.